for Brett Kavanaugh is the prep school, high school kid.
Yeah.
Partier.
Yeah.
Wild, drunken parties and all of that. They're putting him in that category to make it more believable that he did this. So, that's the category that's being used there. In football, if you are in sports, as you go back, I do think because ever since professional sports began, they've been dominated by men.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of a boys' club in a sense.
Very much
and
so.
I do think, I really, truly do think that there was sort of an attitude toward men as women started entering the field that they were, they had to earn their way in a sense. And maybe some men mistakenly thought that they had rights to be a little bit more physical or be a little bit more verbal in bad ways. And so, some of this is coming from a little bit of reality, but it's just overdone, overplayed. So, we're in a transition period. Unfortunately, I'm afraid we're going way too far in making it possible for women to make unsubstantiated charges. And also I'm thinking about, for instance, this article mentions Urban Meyer, the coach, and another coach under him, of course, if most people know the story, was apparently violently abusing his wife, and Urban Meyer and the other athletic director didn't do anything about it, supposedly knew about it. And so he's been suspended for 3 games. I guess he gets to come back now finally and coach.
Yeah.
And, you look at that and you wonder, okay, well, how much responsibility does a man have for somebody under him and his activities? And so, these are questions that we're sorting out as a culture and a society. I think some rules are falling into place, but the rules have to be reasonable and fair to both parties.
What about the age issue? You go to one of the things she mentions is Penn State, and that's Joe Paterno, who is old enough to almost to be our grandfather, but certainly as old as our parents were. Urban Meyer is a kind of in between, and of course, Brett Kavanaugh is a little bit younger, but there is a sense in which, and if you look at some of those individuals that actually found themselves being accused of any kind of behavior, Charlie Rose and a variety of others.
Yeah, the Matt Lauers of the world, the Al Frankens.
There was a sense in which maybe that was almost permitted. There was almost a tendency in the past to turn a blind eye to some of that. And so that's another part of this as well. I mean, today, some of our millennial listeners go, you mean that really was tolerated? Sadly, it was. I mean, you can see that in some of the TV shows. You can see it in some of the sitcoms, some of the commercials and things like that. And here you have a situation where Urban Meyer, according to what Nancy Armour says, was thinking, well, maybe just trying to keep the family together, somehow saving the family was best by keeping a woman and her children in harm's way. None of that makes sense to us now in hindsight. And when Joe Paterno is the coach of the Nittany Lions at Penn State, and he's thinking, well, that's a good coach, and do I really believe he doesn't seem like the kind of person to be a pedophile, so I'm just going to turn my blind eye to it. Hopefully the Me Too, hashtag Me Too movement says, don't turn a blind eye to it. Do something about it, report it, and don't just ignore the kind of signs that apparently even Mark Cuban said I missed because I just wasn't paying attention to it. Well, the point is pay attention.
There's another part of this. I've written about this before. And in some of these cases, especially on college campuses, assault cases and things, I think it's important for people to report if something happens to you, if you're a woman or, if you're assaulted, report it to law enforcement. Some of these college sort of courts, quote unquote, that they have, in certain cases is, they are trying to survive. They're sort of protecting themselves in a sense. So even with the Olympics,
right.
With the doctor that was abusing all those
Dr.
gymnasts.
Nassar.
Yeah. I think, he was finally reported to law enforcement, and he needed to be reported right away. Now, these young girls aren't going to know that, but their parents should have.
Yes. Well, and again, let me just encourage people, if they don't have a copy of the May issue, your article there on the hashtag Me Too is a mixed bag. I mean, you deal with Dr. Larry Nassar's abuse scandal, and you deal with how that is certainly the case. But then you also use an example of the comedian Aziz Ansari, where the poor guy, I mean, he had a date that didn't go well. If you've never been out on a date that didn't go well, then maybe you've never been on many dates, because sooner or later you misread some signals, and I'm not justifying everything he may have said or done, but she walked away from what was an awful date and then begins to accuse him of sexual assault. Well, okay, I put him in an entirely different category.
Well, she was participating in it until she wasn't.
Yeah, okay. And so, we won't get into it as a family-oriented show, but you can kind of figure out what that means. And so this is just, don't you feel sorry for the men and women today trying to go out on a date or hook up or whatever it might be, because it's getting so complex. And so to not understand the gradation between a Dr. Larry Nassar, which you talk about, and a comedian who probably would have been better using the philosophy, when in doubt, don't. Those are very different kind of circumstances, but it illustrates the complex nature of what we find ourselves in today in the 21st century.
I think this would be a good discussion to have sometime when we're just with our listeners, when we're having people call in, because, the feminist movement is, in a sense, asked for this.
Yeah.
Because they asked for all kinds of sexual freedom, the ability to have sex like a man might have sex and think about it that way, to have several partners and not have any stigma about that, to have children out of wedlock and not have a stigma. We've had all that kind of thing. And so then I think the hookup culture is definitely a result of that, because the casualness of sex now is, part of the culture in college. And so then you have to ask the feminists, which way do you want it? Then you're going to be hypersensitive if somebody says something or does something. But you, in a sense, your movement has also asked for it. So this is the way I speak with I've spoken with my daughters as they were growing up, my daughter and my nieces, is you have to be very clear about your boundaries. Not that, I don't know, you have to have like a discussion, but dress modestly. Don't invite them to your room, where you're going to be alone. Try to just be wholesome in your conduct. Don't send those signals.
Right.
If, because as a Christian, you do want to maintain your standards. So be clear, because I think the mixed signals that have been coming from this movement have been part of this. And I think the feminist movement has to take a lot of that blame. I spoke with Mona Charen, who wrote an article or a book about feminism. It was a fabulous book. And she wasn't coming from the point of view that a person has to remain pure until marriage at all. But she was saying that, this culture, this hookup culture, is just so degrading, but we've asked for it to some degree.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, one of the other articles we've posted is some suggest that maybe this is a case of mistaken identity, and I wanted to give you the pro and con to that, because there's some real good questions about it, but I wanted to post it because it's even on Drudge now, so we'll talk about it right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. But let me take on an issue that you may have heard about. For many of you, you may be hearing about it for the first time. It is our second article, and it is the suggestion that maybe this is mistaken identity. When we have the claims from Christine Blasey Ford that the person on top of her was Brett Kavanaugh, there is a suggestion by Ed Whalen, and you might say, who is he? Well, he's with the Ethics and Public Policy Center. When the Ethics and Public Policy Center was started, I was at Georgetown. I knew Ernest Lefevre. I've had friends at the Ethics and Public Policy Center for years. So this is not some weirdo group. This is a very credible individual. Yeah, and so, again, Ed Whalen is very credible, and the Ethics and Public Policy Center is, and what this article is a collection that a woman by the name of Christina Layla put together of the various tweets that were put forward by Ed Whalen. Now, let me just, before I get too far into it, say that our good friend Jim Garrity today said this is really odd because he talks about what he calls the Brett Kavanaugh doppelganger theory, or that he has somebody that looks like him. And he said, first of all, Ed Whalen, after he did this, goes, ooh, I should have done that. And that's what it crossed my mind as well, because Ed Whalen suggests, no, actually, it's not Brett Kavanaugh that actually was the rapist or a potential rapist. It's a guy by the name of Chris Garrett. Well, when you out somebody like that, that's a danger. So, okay, recognize.
Well, it's the thing we told, you know, we're saying shouldn't have been done about Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, we really got some problems here right off the bat. But, okay, I wanted to cover this for a few minutes because people are going to see this on their Facebook page. Now that it showed up on Drudge, I thought, should I cover this or not? When it showed up on Drudge, I said, Penna, okay, we got to cover it. If no other reason than when there are myths out there, there are things that are said that we don't address, people wonder, well, what do you think about that? So I wanted to cover it now, and if it comes up during the next 2 hours after the show continues on, we'll bring it up again. But the argument that he makes is pretty straightforward, and you probably can follow it as well. If you look at where this party supposedly took place, near the Columbia Country Club, which is in Maryland, and I've lived in Virginia, so I kind of have a pretty good idea where that was, and you look at a house that's not even a half a mile from that country club, and then you look at the floor plan of that house that has a stairway that circles around, which is something that is part of the testimony of Christina Ford. And then you look at the location instead of Brett Kavanaugh and the other people that were supposedly at that house and recognize that they live further away. And then you see, if anybody hasn't seen this already, let's see if we hold this up here, and I'll maybe hold it this way. The two pictures of Brett Kavanaugh and Chris Garrett, I mean, they really do look alike. As a matter of fact, the Chris Garrett looks a lot like a fraternity brother I have. You know, I mean, it's amazing how a lot of people have similar kinds of faces. And so the argument that is made is simply this. Is it possible that indeed this took place, but Brett Kavanaugh was not the perpetrator? And it helps answer a question that I've had in my mind, because neither of these two individuals look like they're lying. That's the fallback position. When we open up the phones, I know everybody's going to say, how much was she paid? Or he's lying, she's lying. Is it possible both of them are telling the truth? But we're talking about essentially two different incidents. And so that's why Ed Whalen did this, because he pulls together enough information that looks pretty compelling. Even when you look at the picture now of Kavanaugh and Garrett, they still look a lot alike. They looked a lot alike when they were in high school. They look a lot alike when they are now. The downside is Ed Whalen has apologized, and he says, this is an appalling, it's an inexcusable mistake of judgment on my part of posting a tweet thread in a way that identifies someone else that hasn't been part of the discussion. So I recognize that, but it is an interesting kind of theory. As you might imagine, Christine Ford says, no, I'm convinced it's Brett Kavanaugh. And at this point, you'd have to say, well, then that ends it, because after all, there's never been anybody accused of rape that's ever gone to jail, right? Of course, we've had some of those. So sometimes we misidentify potential rapists and people, especially when it was 36 years ago. So anyway, I wanted to cover it and recognize that we're well aware of it. If you'd like to read it, it's the second article. And if you say, well, you didn't post the apology by Ed Whalen, I can post that one too if you want. But that's kind of where we are in a story that's going to have some staying power. And frankly, I think it's going to do something, Penna, that you and I have talked about off air. Let's talk about it on air. If we go down the investigating this theory, having the FBI get involved, try to evaluate this, Brett Kavanaugh might serve on the Supreme Court as Donald Trump ends his second term at the rate we're going. This is just taking too long. Either you put somebody on the court or you don't. We don't need a 4-4 split on some of these very important Supreme Court cases, do we?
We don't. When I first saw this, it was actually this morning that I saw this Ed Whalen information out there. I thought, oh no. My first thought was, obviously Ed Whalen didn't think this first, but I thought all this does now is complicate things, because really what I've said and what I think a lot of people are saying is, well, Christine Ford won't show up Monday, she says, so let's just go ahead and hold the vote then.
Right.
And
that's our third article, by the way.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a lot more here on the program today. But so when I saw this, I thought this is just going to take it off off kilter in a way and take more time, because then now you have to go in and you have to look at who was the owner of that house and could he possibly be guilty and all of that, and that will take time. So I wanted it to go away. And I thought, Christians, conservatives, everybody who's looking at this, this is just taking us off track. But now that, because Ed Whalen is the one that brought it up, he's so credible. And he's always been very involved in getting good justices confirmed to the various courts who are strict constructionist, constitutionalist, originalist type judges. And that's been his career doing that. So when I saw it, I thought, okay, well, maybe he's really got something to talk about here. So that's down the road. We don't know what's going to happen with that. It's another interesting part of this story. I guess we just have to say that we hope and pray that a week from now we're talking about a justice that has been confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And who knows what's going to happen in the next week. But I hope that's it.
Well, and that gets to something else we might just mention in passing, and that is there are many people that are convinced now that the Democrats will control the House. And there are some that are saying they think Democrats might control the Senate. Now, if you have a split, as a matter of fact, the most recent Outlook magazine just went out. I gave you the scenarios of what it's like if the Democrats control one house or if Republicans control both houses. And then Warren Kelly talks about what happens if Democrats control both houses. So we give you all the scenarios there. But especially this one of the Senate, the hope right now, I think, on the part of some of the Democrats, and maybe the reason why Dianne Feinstein in the first place brought this up is we can just postpone it long enough, at least till after the midterm elections. Then we don't force some of those individuals, in particular the senators in places like Missouri and West Virginia and Montana and North Dakota and Indiana and all sorts of other places, from having to either vote yes or no on Kavanaugh. That, number one, would be helpful to them being reelected or elected in some cases for the first time. And in other cases would then increase the possibility that Democrats could control the Senate. And then I don't think Judge Kavanaugh has a chance once the Democrats control the Senate. So there's a couple of other kind of background issues. And this, I guess, gets back to the concern that we've all expressed, and that is the way this was handled first by the Senate. And then I even have an article here, the reckless coverage of the Kavanaugh allegations is why Americans don't trust the media, because they even pulled a comment that he made years ago. It was an opening joke. We all make jokes sometimes when we start there. And he made some opening joke about what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. And, of course, this was used by Elizabeth Warren to say, I can't imagine any parent accepting this view. Is this really what America wants in its next Supreme Court justice? And so
there's the Me Too movement gone wrong.
Yeah, there's where now even a joke or even a open line for a phrase or a way to kind of get everybody just laughing a little bit is now used against you as a Supreme Court nominee. And I think long term, a lot of people have just simply said, if we continue down this road, we're going to end up with just mediocre people on the Supreme Court, because quality people like Judge Kavanaugh going to say, I don't want to put up with this. Can you imagine what, what he and his wife has had to
if
put
I
up
were
with?
him, I'd be very tempted, but he's such a patriot. I don't think he will ever back down. And that's why I think the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, really owe it to the nominee to move this forward quickly.
Yeah. Well, our third article is no hearing, just votes. We'll talk about that. And, of course, we'll get into just the whole question about this because right now the stipulation from Christina Ford is, well, let him speak first, do an FBI investigation, then maybe I will consent to actually give a presentation. So we'll see how that plays out, and Penna has some comments about that. But again, did want you to know that we did post the second article here if you wanted to read a little bit more about that. Is this a case of mistaken identity? I don't know. It's kind of intriguing, and I wanted you to know enough about it in case you run into it on Facebook or even download it from Drudge. We'll be right back.
New research reveals that the politically correct way we're responding to teens who come out as transgender, affirming that decision and treating them with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, is not helping them. In fact, it's increasing their suffering and is dangerous. Even faced with this evidence, the left won't see it that way. The new study titled Transgender Adolescent Suicide Behavior was published in the September issue of Pediatrics, the official peer-reviewed journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. The study found that more than half of adolescents who are born female but identify as male have attempted suicide in the past year. Let me say this another way. 51% of transgender boys tried to kill themselves in the year prior to the survey. In addition, the study showed the attempted suicide rate to be 40% among adolescents who are gender nonconforming. In other words, they identify as neither exclusively male nor female. And 30% of biological boys who identify as girls said they had attempted to take their own lives in the past year. Any sane person looking at these findings would assume these teens are abnormal, troubled, and need help. In fact, the attempted suicides are a cry for help. But the help being offered by the LGBT left and increasingly by the pediatric community is to affirm these young people in the deception that their gender was somehow misidentified at birth. These disturbing results emerged when researchers from the University of Arizona analyzed a survey filled out by more than 120,000 young people between the ages of 11 and 19. 14% of them said they had attempted suicide at least once, a stark contrast with this alarming rate of attempts among transgender teens, with the number of teens identifying as transgender having doubled in the last decade. We've got to be brave enough as a society to admit that we're doing something very wrong. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and in the next hour, we're going to have Jeremy Dice. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but I thought for just a minute, I might just remind us of so many pieces of evidence that seem to contradict what is being put forward by Christina Ford. And one of those is that you have various individuals that have been around Brett Kavanaugh at different times to say, this doesn't match. Now, the article we just mentioned a minute ago talks about this individual, Mark Ford, who, by the way, was also friends with the so-called doppelganger or twin, if you will.
You mean Mark Judge?
Yeah, Mark Judge. Yeah. And Mark, I'm sorry, I meant Mark Judge, and is an individual that actually knew this individual, Chris Garrett. So, interestingly enough, you have him saying that didn't happen. One of the articles we've posted here third person in the room actually says, I didn't see anything like that. And that's Patrick J. Smythe, who's identified as PJ. So you've got all sorts of kind of contrary evidence. And then one that I thought I just mentioned, and I did talk about this earlier in the week, you had 65 different women who actually put together a letter saying that we have known Brett Kavanaugh since that time. And there were a number of people that were critical of the letter. So we did mention that there was a response from Virginia Hume, and that is Britt Hume's daughter. And I'll just mention real quickly and see if you got some comments about this.
So she signed that letter.
She was one of the 65 women that signed that letter. And so there were three comments that she wanted to respond to. First of all, how did this come together so quickly? That was the big criticism, because they were saying, well, you had this prepared already. And she said, no, the allegations came out on Thursday. She said, I learned about the letter from a friend and a fellow signatory, and others learned about it the same way. Those surprised at the speed with which it came together should see it as yet another testimony to Brett's excellent reputation.
Yeah.
Or also just the speed of the internet.
How fast did the letters from schoolmates come together?
Yeah.
You can put things like that together quickly now.
So that was the first one. To those, she said, who responded to my tweet saying, I knew Brett in high school, by asking if I had gender reassignment surgery. She said,
Boys' schools and girls' schools do get together sometimes.
Yeah, she said, I went to an all-girls school in Bethesda, went to an all-boys school in Bethesda. We were permitted on occasion to speak to people of the opposite sex. And then the third one was to those hearing the thwop, 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 thwop of black helicopters because my father is a journalist or because I worked in politics. She says, in a group of 65 graduates of D.C. area schools, it would be odd not to find someone related to or working as a journalist, as a politician. It's highly unremarkable. This is a company town. That said, it might explain why people happen to see my tweets on the subject in the first place. And then a fourth one, which she wasn't really responding to, she said, finally, to one person who said, I'm too young to know Brett Kavanaugh, truly, I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
She sounds like she's her father's daughter.
Yeah,
she's pretty sharp.
She is very sharp. But again, these are some points that you need to pay attention to. The therapist's notes are different than the testimony of Christina Ford. By her own admission, she's not sure which house, which month,
which year,
maybe year for sure, how she got there, how she got home. Then, of course, she didn't talk about it until 2012. Of course, you have the 65 women. I just mentioned others. We talk about the other witnesses. And one more I thought I'd put on the table. I'll call it the haze of alcohol. You know, the argument at the time is that Brett Kavanaugh was supposedly blindly drunk. Was she of all of her faculties as well?
Well, she was 15 years old, and if she was drinking, which there were just a few people at that party, and they were drinking, there was alcohol, so she likely was. When you're 15, most people don't drink very much before 15, so she wasn't even used to drinking. Mm-hmm. So, you know, she could have been a bit fuzzy.
Yeah.
When I saw those two pictures of those two, I thought, wow, even if they didn't look that much alike, you could definitely be mistaken in a situation like that.
Yeah.
And Brett Kavanaugh himself, he has adamantly denied this every time he's made a statement about it. Said, could this be a case of mistaken identity? He put that out there first. He's the first one to really say that. And, you know, he knew that was a good possibility that she could have had that happen to her, but she just had the wrong person.
You know, and if we do, and the sad reality is, we learned this from Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, it never gets resolved. But if it could get resolved, by the way, I might just mention, talk about not being resolved. You can type in Clarence Thomas right now and see videos which still take the side of Anita Hill, still having documentaries saying that. But if you could in some way resolve that, don't you know that Brett Kavanaugh and his wife and his two daughters would just have to say, this was the most horrific, unpopular, irresponsible, devastating thing of my life and I did nothing to create it. And I found myself in a situation where my character was ruined. And as I've said on this program many times before, but let me say it one more time, you go back to Ray Donovan, who was the Secretary of Labor under Ronald Reagan, who was indicted, who went through a trial and eventually was acquitted, and turns out that he was not guilty at all. And he, at the end of the trial, said, where do I go to get my reputation back? I mean, this is a sense in which Christina Ford, as I like to oftentimes say, is like opening a feather pillow in the wind, and those feathers are scattering everywhere. And even if later on we were to see that Brett Kavanaugh is innocent, do you not know that you will be able on the internet to type in alleged rapist Brett Kavanaugh, and hundreds, maybe thousands of articles will post? Yeah. And it just seems very inappropriate, to put it mildly, and quite frankly evil. But we'll have to get into what that means in terms of jurisprudence in just a minute, because I know Jeremy Dice will be joining us, and that's another question that people have. What do we do if Christina Ford doesn't show up on Monday? And and I think you say we should vote. And what do we do with a Democratic leadership that is saying basically he has to testify and then later she can testify? I love what Jonathan Turley, who is at George Washington Law School, and I quote him quite often because, you know, even though he's a liberal and a progressive, he's a pretty fair individual, said, it's like in baseball saying, you swing and then I'll throw the pitch. You know, and if you know baseball, you know that's not the way it goes. Yeah. And I thought it was just a great illustration of how we just turned everything on its head. We believe her and we don't believe him. We're so concerned that she is treated right, which is still fair, but don't seem to be concerned at all that he's treated right, and he hasn't had a chance to defend himself in a public forum. I think it's about time.
You know, as soon as she made this accusation, there was this whole sector of liberals that said her feelings are more important than the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, her feelings and her trauma trumps what are we doing about the Supreme Court. To me, it's just absurd. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
Well, again, if we find out it isn't mistaken identity, and I don't know that it is, but if it is, she right now says it isn't. But do you ever see her someday? Remember Rosanna Dana, sometimes on Saturday Night Live, if she would go off on the wrong track, you know, she thought it was violence in television. It was violence in television. At the end, she'd go, never mind. You know, I just can't see Christina Ford at the end saying,
she'll never do it.
Mistaken identity, never mind. You know, but that would, again, it just illustrates what is at stake here. And, of course, we will talk with Jeremy about what's at stake in terms of some of these cases, because we really cannot have a Supreme Court that's 4-4. If indeed Brett Kavanaugh steps down or Donald Trump decides to ask him to step down, he's got to turn right around. There are just too many cases where we just can't have a 4-4 tie, and too many important cases coming before the court. But we'll talk about that in the next hour, right after these important messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition. We have around the round table Penna, Dexter, and Jeremy Dice. We have quite a number of articles that we've posted, and we certainly do encourage your phone calls today. We thought, Penna, Dexter, that today we'd be talking about a vote that took place yesterday in the Senate Judiciary Committee, which would, I think, we could reasonably have expected, even with all the controversy, would have passed Brett Kavanaugh out of the committee, and then we would have a full vote next week. And so when you get to that first Monday in October, you would have 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Things haven't quite turned out that way, have they?
No, they haven't turned out that way. And in a sense, I wish that the Senate had stuck to its schedule, because there's just been this delay, excuses, demands coming from Christina Ford and her attorney now to just have the situation where she comes and testifies be just to her liking to the nth degree, with so many demands, including having the nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, testify after her or before her, so that he doesn't even get a chance to address her accusations. And you know, some of the other demands for FBI investigation, when he's already been investigated by the FBI like 6 times for his various positions. And so, now, of course, they were both invited to testify on Monday. Brett Kavanaugh is anxious to do so. And she says, I can't make it Monday, maybe Thursday. So
say that to
I
a
think
judge.
they ought to just, if she doesn't show up Monday, vote.
Well, and that's why I wanted to hear from Jeremy Dice, because we have a process called due process, and it's been around for a few years, too. So explain that to us.
Well, it's an important thing. I mean, it's been around since, 1215, when the Magna Carta was signed, and, the peasants at that time were kind of bothered by the fact, or the barons were more bothered by the fact that the king would be taking things away from them without due process, and a number of other things that are listed in that document. But what has evolved is the wrong term, but what has been part and parcel of our legal system through many cultures, not just the American jurisprudential culture, but certainly within the American legal system, is the right to be able to confront your accuser in open court. And so typically in a criminal, and I am not a criminal attorney, I'm a First Amendment attorney, so take that with a grain of sand, but I do remember criminal law, and I at least got a passing grade in that class, so I know this much. That in a criminal, I clerked for a trial judge for 2 years before I went into private practice. So I watched a number of civil and criminal trials, and really in both of those, but especially in the criminal context, when there has been an allegation of a crime, the person who has been accused of the crime has the right to call witnesses to take his side and to say, this is what I saw. Some of whom are typically not even connected to him, but people that were passersby or people that operated such and such that saw or have witnessed or have a way to say, no, this isn't what happened, I was there. And so typically what happens is that the accuser goes first and says, this is what happened. And usually in a criminal context, it's the state coming in and saying, this is what's happened. We've had police officers do this investigation. They usually bring an officer on the stand to show the evidence that they have. They've before this has even happened, we should start there, right? They have exchanged all the stuff. There's no surprise when it comes to a trial. both sides know what's going to be presented in terms of evidence. In many cases, they've even agreed upon what evidence is going to be shared and which ones is not. They've had hearings about what evidence is going to be provided and which evidence is not going to be provided. And there's usually even motions, they call them in limine, which literally means at the steps, that says that, hey, I just heard about this evidence that the prosecution is going to use. Hey, I haven't had a chance to review that. They can't use that. And the judges routinely grant that type of thing, or they'll delay the trial entirely. But what litigants never get a chance to do is to say, hey, Your Honor, you're a man, so you can't be here. I want to negotiate. By the way, I don't want any, I want to have my lawyers with me, but his lawyers can't be there. 12 jurors, that seems a bit too much. I'd like to have 4. Or maybe I'd like to have 49. And they all need to be women, or they all need to be men, or they all need to be black, or they all need to be white. That you don't get to play those games at all. Because that is setting things up for a backwards way of doing things. It's drawing us back to where we used to be, where the king or the potentate of whatever sort would be the one to come out and say, you're wrong, you're right, and on whatever women fancy, he chose to do so. And so we don't make accusations in the dark, and we certainly don't convict people in the dark. Those are echoes of the French Revolution, for goodness sake, where people could just accuse you of being part of the ruling class and march you down to the guillotine, and literally it was off with your head before you had a chance to even respond to the charges on things. That is not what we have in a Republican democracy such as ours, and yet this is what's playing out right in front of us. So regardless of what you may think, and I think there's every reason to believe that something has happened to this poor woman, and she's suffered a great. If she's making it up, she's sounding very credible in the making it up. So I can't imagine that she's made it up. There's something that's happened here, and we ought to have the right care and concern about that. And Kerby, you and I as men, I think would both agree that we wish that those kinds of things did not happen. I teach my boys how to work against those things and to defend others from that kind of thing happening. So it's awful as to where it has come from. But to destroy someone based on nothing more than an allegation is just absolutely against everything we stand for in our country. And if this is where it's going to go, where does it stop? I mean, it's one thing to play what is clearly a political game here to try to prevent Judge Kavanaugh from becoming Justice Kavanaugh. It's another thing entirely to make that the standard. And what happens in the future? Are we able to say, well, Senator Feinstein, I remember when you were at a party in high school, when was that, 1930-something or other, I remember seeing you doing something when you were drunk. Well, what's she going to say? No, it wasn't me. It's not how I remember it. I remember you being there. You're disqualified from office, right? And so when someone basically calls you a liar, what's your first instinctual response on that? Prove it. Prove it. And I'm perfectly fine if someone has caught me in a falsehood. I hope I haven't lied, or maybe I just simply omitted it. My memory's not always perfect. So if someone says that, I routinely say, prove it. And when I actually have someone come in and prove it, I'm like, oh man, I really blew it on that one. And I admit to it and we go on. But here you can't say that. I mean, that is the basis of our judicial system is prove it. Yeah. Right? You can't sue Mark Cuban for $1 billion without proving that he did something wrong. Right? It doesn't work that way. It's blackmail otherwise. You actually have to prove that he did something wrong. He violated the law. He broke a contract, whatever it might be. You have to prove it. And in this system, what we're having right now, this hearing, this circus that we're hearing here, is just ignoring the prove it element entirely.
We have a circus. Well, it's almost time for a break, so I don't think I'm even going to ask the question, but let me just start it. I thought that Senator Grassley did the right thing in immediately saying, okay, you can both present your cases on Monday. It was a reasonable amount of time to make plans to come, so prove it. And so after the break, I'd like to talk about, people's thoughts about why this is not happening. Why was this Christina Ford unwilling to come on Monday, but she says maybe she'll come on Thursday? Is it because she can't prove it? Is that the main reason? And should we allow more accommodations of her in order to try to attract more votes for Kavanaugh? Or should we just move forward and have a vote?
Well, that's a question we're putting on the table. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. What do you think of this circus? With apologies to those of you that work in a circus. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
2 weeks ago, I happened to turn on a campaign rally when President Trump was speaking. As usual, he was talking about fake news and made a statement that I knew would be criticized by historians. He said, you know, when Abraham Lincoln made the Gettysburg Address speech, you know he was ridiculed. The point he was making is that there was fake news then, so we shouldn't be surprised we have it now. Then he went on to remind everyone that Lincoln's speech was revered years later, and he believed that would happen to him. So let's ignore Donald Trump's comparison to Abraham Lincoln so that we can focus on an important historical point. How was Lincoln's Gettysburg Address received at the time? Generally, the northern newspapers were favorable to Lincoln's speech, while southern newspapers predictably attacked it. But even looking at the northern papers, you get a mixed reaction. Writers doing a fact check on Lincoln's speech remind us of two different reactions in Chicago newspapers to the Gettysburg Address. The Chicago Times suggested that the cheeks of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, and dishwater utterances. By contrast, the Chicago Tribune praised the speech and believed that it will live among the annals of man. Some of the social media criticism of Donald Trump's statement about the media reaction to the Gettysburg Address cited the New York Times news story. However, if you read the story, the author merely mentions that Lincoln spoke in a very deliberate manner and doesn't praise the speech. In fact, in a previous sentence, the story describes the prayer of Reverend Stockton as touching and beautiful. Nothing like that is attached to Lincoln's speech. So it's fair to say that President Trump was at least half right. Some newspapers attacked the speech while others praised it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, now playing, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have Penna Dexter as well as Jeremy Dice with us. And again, he is with First Liberty, and we've posted a number of articles. Last hour on our local show, we talked about Mark Cuban and male privilege. That was something that was in USA Today. I just thought I'd mention that. We also talked about the possibility of mistaken identity, but some of the others we're going to get into this hour. No hearing, just vote. That is one by Andrew McCarthy the other day. Said it looked like a setup. Had one called, the third person in the room has come forward and said that didn't happen. So we're now starting to run to a number of individuals that have been associated with Brett Kavanaugh that said, we were there, nothing happened. And then also one on the midterm elections, because this is going to have an impact. And Penna, that's part of the issue. If indeed Democrats, who seem to be at least somewhat interested, maybe real interested in postponing this till maybe even after the election, that, first of all, prevents a number of U.S. senators in Missouri and West Virginia and Indiana and Nevada, North Dakota and Montana, all sorts of places, some running for the first time, some running for re-election, from having to vote on some of those issues and then allowing them to vote later and maybe even defeat it. So there is also that issue that we'll get into a little bit later, because this has an impact on the elections. Also has an impact, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, on the Supreme Court. I just don't think we need any more 4-4 ties. That just never resolves anything in front of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, a lot of times you have to actually get a do-over for the issue. And so a 4-4 tie it's just inconvenient at best and devastating at worst. But, you know, with regard to the election, there's just been a few people saying, well, this is just, if he is not confirmed and he has to drop out, I'm talking about Kavanaugh, this is good for getting Republicans out to vote, but it's terrible for Republicans. Number one, you mentioned sparing the Democrats in red states and states that went for Trump from having to vote on this nomination. Number two, the issue, the Me Too movement and all of that is a huge, wonderful, motivating issue for Democrats and liberals. So I think it would help them in the election. Another part of it is if the Republicans cannot get this done, it's been one of their key issues is to get people on the Supreme Court that were originalists and that would, help bring the court back into a constitutional balance. And if Republicans can't do that, then I think that's bad for Republicans in the election.
It very well could be. And who knows where it actually goes. But the very fact that we're talking about its impact upon the elections, I think, raises a very interesting point. Why wasn't this raised with Justice Gorsuch? I mean, think about that for a second. Maybe there was not even the allegation or a hint of an allegation. Gorsuch seems to be a rather stand-up guy and seems to be pretty squeaky clean.
So does Kavanaugh.
So does Kavanaugh. I mean, they both look or have the outward appearance of being squeaky clean. And until last week, nobody even thought that this kind of thing would come out necessarily. But look at the timing of that, perhaps. When was Gorsuch's hearings? I just looked it up just to make sure I was remembering correctly, but it was in March. That's a long ways away from any kind of November date, and it certainly was not even in the off-year election and thing. So it lends credence to one more idea that this has been a political ploy all along, that Senator Feinstein had this information back in June, did nothing with it whatsoever until there was the last minute you could do the most damage with the information, and then try to kind of stumble it out of the gates with some sort of allegation that they would quickly circle the wagons around to delay and distract and deter. I don't know that's going to work, and it actually may in fact backfire at the polls. It may in fact do that, because I think
if it works though to the extent that he's out of here, I don't think that's good for Republicans.
No, I agree with that. If they cave and allow this vote to go down, that's very bad for Republicans, because as I saw in another article somewhere, the base that is the GOP base right now is the Trump base, and they want a guy like Trump who, for all his great distractions, is a guy who is perceptively one who never backs down from anything. And he's kind of shown himself to be that kind of a president. But you just listen to conservatives around the country. In fact, I bet you we'll have a caller here today that'll say something to the same effect that says, "I'm just waiting for the Republicans to cave." And, they always do this. They always fall to I was just listening to Rush Limbaugh's show on the way down here, and that was one of their callers saying, "Hey, look, I'm just waiting for the Republicans. They're going to cave at some point." How many times do they have to be fooled by the left's games here to know? Well, so far, they seem to be kind of holding the line and kind of divvying out a little bit more rope for the left to hang themselves with. Whether or not they will turn around and have that news around them is another question left for another day.
And again, I'd love to hear from some of you callers in Tennessee, because Bob Corker said, well, maybe we can't vote on it. I'd love to hear from some of you in Arizona, because Jeff Lake says, well, maybe we can't vote on it. But let's take some phone calls along the way, because I want to get your comments. We'll head to Texas. First of all, TC, you have the floor. What's your point of view?
Yeah, I cannot believe that they're going all the way back to this guy's high school days. I was telling the screener, I went to a high school full of Irish, Italian, Polish, and German Catholic kids, probably 95% of which I was one. I didn't practice Roman Catholicism, but the one thing we all us good-looking, lustful, sex-crazy males want is to score every weekend at a party, at a nightclub, and that's all we talk about. That's all we thought about, and it was that was the way it was in all the high schools in the area around Milwaukee and Chicago that I knew about. I knew other kids too.
And when you hear the story about Mark Judge, who of course wrote about that, that sounds like him. And of course now we have not only Mark Judge saying this didn't happen, you got Patrick Smythe, who is identified as PJ, I couldn't get it out right. And that's our third article here or I guess it's the fourth article here. So again, there were some people like that. Brett Kavanaugh doesn't look like he was one of those guys, but who knows? But let's take another phone call here and get some more of your comments. Let's go to Georgia, the Good News Network. Marie, what would you like to add to our conversation?
I would like to say, look at the times where the police or the authorities, we'll say it that way, where maybe she did get, was allegedly assaulted. But the police may not have taken her view or her complaint and they dismissed it. In turn, I had a stalker. I went through the chain of command of police department, and they basically told me somebody's got to get hurt before we get involved. So even if if that person was going for office today and I wanted to step in and said he was a stalker, whatever, there's no documentation. Even though I had witnesses, even though I went through authorities, they did not take it serious. They basically was like, because I even put the guy's windows out, and they was like, we don't want to charge you, just pay for the windows.
Penna, you and I have talked about this before, that there was kind of a mindset of turning a blind eye. Matter of fact, a previous discussion, we talked about how at Penn State, whether it's Joe Paterno or certainly Urban Meyer at Ohio State, or, of course, now we've just had this latest one here in the Dallas area with Mark Cuban, they didn't see something. They missed something, or in some cases, the police didn't bring charges. So I think if nothing else, we're talking about, is there anything positive about the #MeToo movement? Maybe that's one of them, people taking this seriously for the first time.
Yeah. I do think, though, with regard to reporting things to the police, even if there's no prosecution or charge raised, that if you report something that's done to you, there's going to be documentation of that.
Yeah, at the very least, there's that. And let's remember, just to your point, Kerby, that this is wrong. I mean, this kind of behavior is wrong. I don't know where TC was going in his call, but my hope is that it was going to end in some form of regret. It kind of sounded in his voice like that was the direction. Like, look, we did these things too, and now I regret it. So, parents, if you're listening, this is a great opportunity. As much as we don't want to discuss it with our kids, teach your young men how to be gentlemen. Teach your young ladies how to protect themselves and how to enlist others to protect themselves, and to create a safe environment for them to report this to you. I mean, if I had a daughter that this had happened to and she felt like she had to be quiet because she was scared of my reaction, it would absolutely destroy me. And that's another issue. Where is the dad in the situation coming out? I mean, if this was my daughter making this accusation, perhaps he's not there anymore. But if this were me, I'd be in front of the first microphone. Actually, they'd have to the marshals would have to restrain me from Judge Kavanaugh, because I would probably be trying to attack the man. I mean, it's just that simple. I've got to. I feel the duty to protect my daughter and my children on these things. And if I hear these things, I'd be outraged by it all. That's not happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, mom and dad, pay attention to your kids. This is a good opportunity to remind them this type of brutish behavior by men, it's not part of the American experience that teenagers have to go through. In fact, the opposite should be true. You should be avoiding how close to the line you can come. You should go the other direction from that. Teenage drunkenness never works out in the positive direction at all. It's a bad idea. Stay away from it.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the things I mentioned yesterday, teenage binge drinking has dropped precipitously. And as a matter of fact, teenage drug use, with the exception of marijuana, has dropped as well. So some things are going in the right direction. Marijuana is not one of them, but certainly those are a couple of issues. We've got a full bank of phone calls, as you might imagine. So when we come back, we'll give a few more of you a chance to weigh in with your comments. The program's called Point of View. We want to hear your point of view, and that will happen right after these important messages.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that one of the articles we've posted is by Andrew McCarthy, No Hearing, Just Vote on the Kavanaugh Nomination. Let me go around the round table, but it certainly seems to me that everybody on our round table believes that that should take place. Now, we did post a piece earlier in the week by Andrew McCarthy, which said this is a setup, and it looked like a setup. But says the FBI has no jurisdiction in this case, so having her say that the FBI should investigate doesn't make any sense. Penna, you've mentioned the FBI's looked at this many times before. This isn't the first rodeo, as they like to say in West Texas, for Brett Kavanaugh. So if indeed we don't have the accuser show up on Monday, I get the sense you're thinking, let's just go ahead with the vote.
Well, I think Andrew McCarthy was right. He wanted the vote to happen last Thursday.
Yes.
And I mentioned I thought it was gracious of Chuck Grassley to go ahead and schedule something Monday. And he had to do that because there were senators that weren't going to vote for Kavanaugh if Christina Ford didn't get to have her say. But some of them are pulling back. Like I noticed Bob Corker of Tennessee has now said, if she's not going to show up, let's just have the vote. And I mean, that just makes perfect sense. McCarthy says the contemptuous stall strategy is being rewarded. If we continue to stall this out, we're rewarding that strategy, and whether it's successful or not, it will just continue to be used. He also says Ford is playing games about when and whether she will testify. So if we say to her, okay, if not Monday, how about later? What day do you want to, Christina? She's playing games with us, and the Democrats, whoever's behind her, whether it's her attorney advising her or whoever. Also, McCarthy says we'll never know what really happened, and there's no reason to really have a hearing. That's been his stance. But politically, I think we had to have one. We had to at least offer it. We've offered it. Now let's move on.
Yeah, look, the initial message was, well, Dianne Feinstein says this is an anonymous thing. We want to respect the anonymity. Okay, fine, get it. But we can't respond to anonymous complaints. Really, that's hard. So the person outed herself and doxed herself. So this is me. But now she doesn't want to talk about it. And she wants guards coming to her house because of the death threats that she's receiving. And she wants to have this negotiated tactic for that thing. And, she's going down the list of negotiations and things. And now, no, I don't want to talk. I don't want more harm coming to me. I don't want to have more accusations being lobbed against me. Well, no one dragged you into this. You brought this out on your own. And if this is such a horrible thing, then please, by all means, come. Let's talk about it. And I think you'll find, even among the Republicans up there, that they would be the first ones to defend a legitimate claim. I don't think anybody's going to be backing off of that. But we don't accuse each other in the darkness. That's not what this society is about. This has never been what the American system is about. We don't put people in jail without a right. For goodness sakes, we've given terrorists that attacked us on September 11th a trial. And goodness sakes, we put them into our court system. They flew a plane into our building, and we put them into our court system and gave them the benefit of a free attorney to go, talk to us at trial. We can certainly do that here as well in a truncated manner. Come and confront the issue. If it's false, own up to it. You're going to have to own that falseness. But we cannot have a system in which that we're able to say, this is what happened, but I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to prove it, but it happened. That doesn't work.
There's a letter, too, that Dianne Feinstein has that she's still not released, apparently, that was written to her was it written by Christina Ford? That's interesting to me because probably it just shows the weakness of these charges. Otherwise, I think they would have released it.
Hey, and don't forget, wasn't it just this past week that Justice Ginsburg came out and said this process is ridiculous?
Yes, I thought that was very encouraging to
Justice
hear from
Ginsburg
her
saying
yes.
that. Now, this is too political. She says, I wish they would go back to the way they did it when I was confirmed. Those are the good old days. Those are the good old days, right? Yeah. Goodness sakes, I was at a restaurant the other day, and I went up as one of those that had free refills, and I went up, I took my cup, and I looked the waitress straight in the eye and I said, I'm going to have a refill. You can't stop me. And she said, sir, they're free. I said, you can't stop me. I know what I'm doing. I'm taking this Coke right now. Sir, they're free refills. This is my Spartacus moment. I am taking this refill.
I knew you were going to finally say the Spartacus. I was waiting for Spartacus. And truth be told, we actually made it almost 40 minutes into the broadcast before we got our first comment about Spartacus. I was waiting for that. Good job.
I couldn't work it in any earlier.
It was very good. Let's go to Mac in Georgia. Mac, what would you like to add to our conversation today? You have your Spartacus moment if you'd like.
This is just, I believe, a ploy. The Republicans are so weak, they'll let the Democrats just go all over them. I'm telling you. And they stretch this out till they have really made a headache and made a bad spot on it. They should have nipped this in the bud right to start with, as Barney would say with Andy F. Griffith.
Nip it in the bud, and again, Chuck Grassley's been overly gracious. Is that fair? I appreciate, Penna, you giving him the benefit of the doubt, but somewhere along the line, people have to grow a spine here and say, this is just, there are just too many questions about the accusation from Christine Blasey forward that we just have to put on the table. And that's why we've posted some of these articles here today.
Hey, Mac, thanks for making me a prophet. I called it. I mean, this is the tenor of most of the comments I've seen on this from good people like Mac, who seem to be, my guess, Mac, I don't know you, but my guess is you're a regular run-of-the-mill kind of a good guy out there in Georgia, one of my favorite states. I have a lot of history in Georgia, so
yes,
good people down there. Probably a Braves fan, which is a good thing as well, especially this year. But this is the kind of mentality I think that is out there. That's your kind of run-of-the-mill Trump voter right now. We don't want people to back down. We've seen this happen far too often. In fact, I've got to give credit where credit is due too. Mitch McConnell, who has had some accusations of being a rather flimsy backside on occasion, he has had an absolutely strong
some of his speeches
leadership on these things on the judges. Consider that President Trump has nominated, I think now, was something like 25% of the judiciary, federal judiciary. It's huge. It's historic, and largely the reason those men and women are sitting right now on the bench is due to Mitch McConnell and his leadership to make sure those things go through and get a vote. I would like to see some more, but the fact is he has not been cowed by the left. He and his leadership have done a great thing. And I think Chairman Grassley deserves some credit on that as well. But, Mac, you're exactly right. I'm scared at every moment because of past history, as you and I have both seen, that the GOP is going to roll. I can just feel it, but it seems like things are going in the right direction for now. Let's hope it stays that way.
I might just mention one other article we've just posted on the World War I cross, the Bladensburg cross, because we're going to talk about what that means as well. But let me take at least one or two more phone calls here just to get some comments from you, because we're going to put more on the table as we go along. But we'll go to Ohio this time, WGGN. And Gary, what's your point of view?
Yes, sir. Mine starts as a father and a grandfather to girls. And my concern, I was in law enforcement for many years and even served as a detective for many years. And many women, whether they're teenagers or adult women, don't come forward because of the persecution they go through for sexual crimes committed against them. I'm not into politics. Don't think that I go for one party or the other. I think they're all rich people out for their own good. So it doesn't matter what the agenda is here, but why do we have to rush a hearing without giving the proper amount of time? And nobody can discuss the proper amount of time because the only two people know what happened is her and him. And I fear that this tells girls and women out there, don't ever report anything because your past will be brought up against you. You will be placed in the press based on your past, not on the event that happened. And that I find disturbing.
You know, the sentiment that you are expressing right now is a valid one, but it's the exact reason why they're using this tactic, because the sympathy for females in this situation is supposed to trump a constitutional process for confirming a nominee to the Supreme Court. So it's not the right who is mixing apples and oranges here. It's the left. They're weaponizing people's compassion for women in that situation to derail a nomination. She doesn't have enough to go on. I've just got to disagree with you there. She doesn't have enough to go on to give her any more time.
Well, but not only that, they are giving her time.
Yeah.
Come to the hearing. Come show it. I mean, Gary, you're a police officer, have been in law enforcment, you've mentioned.
Yes.
You know that's what our system is built upon. You've probably gone to trial and had to provide testimony of evidence that you've obtained to allow the prosecution to do their job. I think that's all that the sides are saying. Go back 30, 25 years now when it was Anita Hill accusing Clarence Thomas of inappropriate sexual harassment. She at least had the decency to come to the Senate and provide open testimony under oath that this had happened. I don't know that ever really got resolved, but Justice Thomas at least had the chance to say in front of everybody, this is what she said. I don't agree with it all. And that allowed the Senate to say, well, it's a he said, she said. I ascribe more credibility to his side of the facts than hers, and allows us to make a decision. This is what this is about. Allow the facts to come out and have the chance to say, I believe him and not her, or her and not him.
We'll be right back.
New research reveals that the politically correct way we're responding to teens who come out as transgender, affirming that decision and treating them with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, is not helping them. In fact, it's increasing their suffering and is dangerous. Even faced with this evidence, the left won't see it that way. The new study titled Transgender Adolescent Suicide Behavior was published in the September issue of Pediatrics, the official peer-reviewed journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. The study found that more than half of adolescents who are born female but identify as male have attempted suicide in the past year. Let me say this another way. 51% of transgender boys tried to kill themselves in the year prior to the survey. In addition, the study showed the attempted suicide rate to be 40% among adolescents who are gender nonconforming. In other words, they identify as neither exclusively male nor female. And 30% of biological boys who identify as girls said they had attempted to take their own lives in the past year. Any sane person looking at these findings would assume these teens are abnormal, troubled, and need help. In fact, the attempted suicides are a cry for help. But the help being offered by the LGBT left and increasingly by the pediatric community is to affirm these young people in the deception that their gender was somehow misidentified at birth. These disturbing results emerged when researchers from the University of Arizona analyzed a survey filled out by more than 120,000 young people between the ages of 11 and 19. 14% of them said they had attempted suicide at least once, a stark contrast with this alarming rate of attempts among transgender teens, with the number of teens identifying as transgender having doubled in the last decade. We've got to be brave enough as a society to admit that we're doing something very wrong. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter and Jeremy Dice here. I just might mention again, I've mentioned this many times over the last couple of weeks, but the May issue of the Outlook magazine, understanding the hashtag #MeToo movement. And certainly that is one of the issues that was just raised a minute ago. And Penna, you've done a very good job of writing on that issue.
How can people get that?
Again, they just write in for it. And again, maybe we should take some of these articles and post it, because your piece on Me Too is a mixed bag. It was very good to just kind of understand the positives and the negatives of that. And then the whole issue on sexual harassment, that one is available as well. So you can contact us here at Point of View if you'd like to read it. And I got a feeling we'll be coming back to this issue again. We were addressing it long before we were thinking about this being an issue with a Supreme Court nominee, but we certainly have been paying attention to this in terms of what it has meant in Hollywood, what it's meant in the media, what it's even meant in politics. You know, Al Franken, Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, you can go on down the list. But let's take a few more phone calls just to give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation. 1-800-351-1212. Jim, you have the floor. What's your point of view?
How you doing?
I'm good. What would you like to add?
Yeah. I just finished my law school, the 4 years, and I'll be going up to take my test. I want to ask you a question about excuse me, I'm trying to think 2 or 3 things here about the prosecution and the defense having the opportunity to decide which one of them is going to go first. Do you think maybe this might be something new coming down where the judge might decide for the people which one needs to go first and present their case?
And again, I'm going to come to Jeremy Dice. You've got law school and taken your test already and been a lawyer for many years. We always have the accuser so that the person being in defense of the accusations has the last opportunity to speak. But it seems like right now they want to reverse that.
That's right. And hopefully that doesn't portend things into the future that the left wants to remake our judicial system to allow these open negotiations so that murderers can say, you guys go first and we'll back cleanup after that. And that's not how any of this works, and it's not how it's worked for a long time. Of course, the Senate is a different place. It's not a courtroom, and we don't have a judge that presides over top of the Senate hearings there, as much as Chuck Grassley has done a good job of leading. He's not in a black robe leading the whole thing. But they've taken their cues from our legal system on how to provide this. And what they're doing is saying, look, in a situation where it's a he said, she said, you're effectively asking the Senate, as the ones that are tasked with providing this advice, consent, and the final vote on things, to choose between the two who's telling the right story here. Well, it's impossible to do that unless people come and talk to you about it. And if you're just going to simply say, well, this is the information that's out there, go for it, that's one thing. They can do that, and it's real hard, and in a political body like the Senate, that's going to be even more difficult. But that's why we allow people to come in and talk about it all. If she's going to make an accusation against Judge Kavanaugh, then he should have the right to be able to respond to say, no, that's not true, and here's why. It's like I said earlier in the show here, that if someone calls you and says you're a liar, Kerby, your first response is prove it. Mm-hmm. Prove it. And it has to be prove it. Otherwise, the person that is accusing you of lying is himself lying. Right, and you're compounding the problem rather than addressing the situation. So if, in fact, she's able to come and prove the situation, which she bears the responsibility of doing under our typical processes here in this country, then fine. And I think, I would hope even Kavanaugh would back up and say, whoa, this is a problem, and I'm so sorry. But to accuse a man who is supposed to be presumed innocent in a crime, and let's just move this over into the criminal context. If this were, in fact, an accusation brought by the state of Maryland against Judge Kavanaugh for having engaged in this criminal behavior, he would have the presumption that he's innocent. Right now, the left is trying to say, no, we're going to presume that he's guilty. In fact, we had a senator come out and say that all the men need to shut up. Right? There's a presumption that every man, anybody who has a Y chromosome, is immediately disqualified and needs to shut up. That's a U.S. senator who's saying that. Think about that. Now, that upends our entire idea of presumed innocent until proven guilty. And if we're not going to allow people to prove these things, we're not going to require people to prove them, then anyone can force it on them at all.
Have you noticed in the media this week the stories about boys' schools? I mentioned this in the first hour, I think, the prep schools. So, just the culture and the atmosphere in prep schools was described in various articles. And so it puts you in this category. I mean, you mentioned the high-tech lynching that Clarence Thomas talked about. So boys' schools are like an identity. If you went to one, you're automatically part of that drunken culture that takes advantage of women. And there was just a lot out there in the media this week. So it was sort of like a trial in the media.
Yeah, and I hope we destroy that.
Yeah.
That it should not be part of our common cool element of being an American young man, full-blooded, whatever that is. That's stupid, it's wrong, and it's immoral. Yeah. Stop it. You shouldn't be doing those things. But the fact that we're going to allow unsubstantiated accusations to stay out there is equally wrong. I remember when I was in high school, I went to a private high school myself, not one of these kind of weekend party kind of schools, thankfully, but a private religious school that I went to down in Florida. And I was accused of having done something. And in fact, I was brought down to the principal's office, and I remember to this day, I came around the corner and saw my parents shooting lasers through their eyes at me, and I didn't know what was going on. I was completely sandbagged by this thing. And I came in and found out, I understood what the situation actually had been. Someone had stole the journalism camera, and I happened to be down the line of the pictures in there, so someone thought I had done something. I won't get into exactly what other people had done, but it was inappropriate. Yeah. Thankfully, I had not done it. But thankfully, more importantly, I had told my dad when that happened. I had said to my dad, I think it was stupid for these guys to have done that. I was near when it was going on, but I refused to participate in the behavior. And thankfully, my dad was able to come to my defense. And you know what? I was able to confront my accusers. I was able to prove that I wasn't the one that had done it. And then they went on to find the person who had actually done it. So This is important for us. Moms, dads, this is a teachable moment right now. Teach your kids that these drunken party weekends is not a part of the American experience, nor should it be. And it certainly is not part of whatever moral code you might hold to. That's not appropriate. Whoever has done this to Ms. Ford, Dr. Ford, if it in fact has truly happened, and I have no reason to doubt that it did, that person is wrong. He is engaged in immoral, wrong, and illegal behavior and needs to be held accountable for it all. And if it was Judge Kavanaugh, I'm happy to hold him accountable. But someone come and prove it for me. I don't know if it is or not. On this testimony, I can't prove it.
Yeah, and what we have right now is proof by innuendo. The example I use is when they found a little clip years ago when Brett Kavanaugh opened his speech with a joke in which he said, I actually went to Georgetown Prep, and what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. That was just a joke. But that was enough for Elizabeth Warren to say, we should not have this person on the Supreme Court. That's guilt by innuendo. We don't want that, do we?
I mean, goodness sakes, we have a race down here in Texas right now between two men, Ted Cruz and Robert Francis O'Rourke, Beto, as they call him.
And we got a debate tonight.
And we have a debate tonight on it all. But why is nobody pointing out that Robert Francis O'Rourke has had proven allegations, criminally proven against him? He's been convicted of crimes. No one's actually we allege he did this with no evidence.
He's actually been convicted.
He's actually been convicted. Right? And yet he's a legitimate candidate apparently right now. Where were they? It was Keith Ellison. Yeah. They dismissed all those charges against him as if that was no big deal. Well, wait a minute. Why aren't we giving that accuser the same right as we're giving this one? It would make a lot more of us happy if we saw the Democrats and the Republicans having an equal share in the problems here. I was reading an article about Senator Booker of some comments he made about groping a woman when he was a teenager. Is he now disqualified from office? Well, I guess under their standards he should be.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot more to cover, and we have a full bank of phone calls. So those of you that hang around, we'll give you that opportunity in the next hour. And we also have some updates on the Bladenberg's case. So we'll get to that right after these important messages.
Go mobile with Point of View and take transformation with you on the go. Search in Google Play or the Apple Store for Point of View Radio, the Point of View Radio mobile app. Download it free today.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is Weekend Edition. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice. We are going to, this hour, continue some of the conversation about Brett Kavanaugh, but I do want to get to a couple of other issues. You will notice that Penna Dexter's commentary today is about this issue of transgender teen suicide, so that's one topic. Certainly, in just a few minutes, I also want to get to something that we've just more recently posted, and this is a piece that Jeremy Dice is very familiar with about the Bladensburg's Cross, and really a very excellent piece about its history and everything. So that is available on the website. But we've got some of you that have been waiting quite a long time to get on the program, so let's give you that opportunity. We'll head out to New Mexico. James, thank you for your patience. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Thank you, Point of View, Kerby and Penna, for taking my call. Penna, you have my vote for you need to be on the show a lot more.
Thanks.
Kerby and Penna and your whole crew there. It's a multifaceted jewel, and one of the facets of the jewel is that if the alternative candidate was in the White House, I and my family would be fighting that person tooth and nail, just like they are Donald Trump, and in this case, Mr. Kavanaugh. I just wanted to point that out. I think you guys would be joining me, and I hope I don't wreck your wonderful show today.
I'm trying to think about how it was handled when Sonia Sotomayor was nominated, when Elena Kagan was nominated. You know, it wasn't like this.
No, it wasn't. And again, let's take Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's probably the most liberal on the court. Confirmed 96-3. And if you go back even a little bit earlier, she was this week, we were talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, even remembered a time when Anthony Scalia, I guess it was it was not Anthony Kennedy, but it was Antonio Scalia. He was confirmed by 90-something. Now, when you get to the two with Kagan and Sotomayor, it's in the 60s still, but there is nothing that was as close as what you had with Samuel Alito, or even more recently with Neil Gorsuch. So it almost always has been the case that Republicans, Democrats historically, and even Republicans more recently have said, well, the president gets his nominee unless there's some real significant issue. But when it's a Republican president, the Democrats hardly ever do. And you're lucky if you are going to get 51 votes this time, if indeed there's even a possibility for Brett Kavanaugh making it out of the committee and before the complete Senate. So I think there's always been a philosophy, which I think is what was intended by the framers. Advice and consent, we really just want to make sure that you're not engaged in nepotism, putting some unqualified person in the federal judiciary, on the Supreme Court, or in your cabinet. But by and large, we usually, historically, have given the president an opportunity to get his, or if you had, as he was talking about this, or her, if she had been the president, her nominee on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's right. And going back, I looked up the numbers just to make sure I was right on them. Kagan was confirmed 63-37. Right. Sotomayor was 68-31. Justice Alito, though, was 58-42, and that was after a lengthy filibuster, if you recall.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's odd that these things tend to go back and forth, but not in the same kind of swing one way or another. Look, I think, James, if this were the other way around and it was President Rodham Clinton that was in the office now, nominating whom shall we say, Merrick Garland,
or Lawrence Tribe, or
whomever. We would certainly be opposed to the person, but on the grounds of their legal philosophy is absolutely terrible for our country, and I would make the case for each one of those on those grounds. I do not recall ever having anybody on the GOP side make allegations against a Supreme Court nominee that they had some sort of inappropriate affair or anything like that at all. Now, that's come from the left on Clarence Thomas. It's come from the left now on Judge Kavanaugh. But I don't recall that in the history of our country coming out of that other direction as well. But what both of these things say to us, what it says to us now, is how overly important the Supreme Court has become. It is supposed to be a separate and equal branch of the rest of the bodies, but in some ways somewhat lesser, because the actual work of legislating is supposed to be done by the legislature. That's why it's kind of the centerpiece of our Constitution, that they're the ones that are actually supposed to be doing the hard day-to-day work because it's closest to the people, it's most accountable to the people. Go back and listen to Ben Sass's absolutely excellent discussion of this during the Senate confirmation hearings when he was being interrupted a couple times, I suppose, by the protesters there. But it's a wonderful instruction to us, and history teachers all over the country should be applying that every day. But it overplays how important things have become, that we've now not only put so much attention to it all, but it's become political. It's become very overtly political, and that was the farthest thing from what the founders wanted to have happen on our Supreme Court.
And look at it another way. Stephen Breyer had a little bit of a cloud over his head, but nobody brought it up or made a big deal. Elena Kagan, they said, we're not even going to ask for some of the records here because she'd been Solicitor General. Mm-hmm. And look at here, you had about 500,000 records that were given to the Senate Judiciary, and they still wanted more during the time when he was at Bush. So the game has always been seemingly played on one side.
Well, and think of Justice Kennedy. Justice Kennedy was the third pick.
Right.
The third pick. It was a different Ginsburg. It was not related to
Bork, Ginsburg, and then finally Kennedy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So after they borked one and they got rid of another by an allegation, they finally resulted in Kennedy, and that's been a fantastic success, of course. So, I mean, it always comes from the left, it seems, where they make these wild accusations. Whereas, I mean, look, I hope I'm being as nonpartisan as I can here. I'm just looking at the record. It usually comes from the left, where these harebrained accusations come out of things.
Well, it's because, as Ben Sass said, the Congress and the legislators, in a sense, are weakened, and the courts have become strengthened and been asked to do the job of legislators. And so the left sees that going away if the court becomes what it should be. If the court becomes a court that will just interpret the law and not make the law, the left loses a powerful tool, and they are scrambling to hold on to that tool, and they're doing really whatever they think they have to do. They're doing it.
I had to mention this the other day, and I want to mention it one more time, because when you mentioned Douglas Ginsburg was actually set aside because, you remember what it was? Marijuana.
Right,
He used marijuana.
The poor guy. I mean, think about it now.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that just shows you. And also, one other point, sometimes you've heard this, third time is a charm. No, third time is never a charm. No. You can go back to Richard Nixon, Haynesworth, Carswell, then who do we get? Harry Blackmun. Anybody remember Harry Blackmun?
I'd rather not.
Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
And then Bork, Robert Bork, Douglas Ginsburg, and then Anthony Kennedy. And that hasn't turned out so well as well. So third time has never been a charm for the Supreme Court. What do you have in common? Both of those were Republican presidents, both of whom had the Democratic-controlled Congress throw one out after another and finally end up with a third one that was acceptable. And in every one of those cases, those two very significant cases, we ended up with individuals that gave us rulings that give some of us... It makes our hair hurt just to think about this right now. But we're going to take a break.
Is that a wise crack? I mean,
makes us lose our hair over it, something like that. We're going to take a break.
Not helping.
Not helping. Yeah, I'm trying to put some humor in here in a very dire set of circumstances. So when we come back, we've got some more calls, but we're also going to update you on why this is so important, because the Supreme Court might be considering some very important cases. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
2 weeks ago, I happened to turn on a campaign rally when President Trump was speaking. As usual, he was talking about fake news and made a statement that I knew would be criticized by historians. He said, you know, when Abraham Lincoln made the Gettysburg Address speech, you know he was ridiculed. The point he was making is that there was fake news then, so we shouldn't be surprised we have it now. Then he went on to remind everyone that Lincoln's speech was revered years later, and he believed that would happen to him. So let's ignore Donald Trump's comparison to Abraham Lincoln so that we can focus on an important historical point. How was Lincoln's Gettysburg Address received at the time? Generally, the northern newspapers were favorable to Lincoln's speech, while southern newspapers predictably attacked it. But even looking at the northern papers, you get a mixed reaction. Writers doing a fact check on Lincoln's speech remind us of two different reactions in Chicago newspapers to the Gettysburg Address. The Chicago Times suggested that the cheeks of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, and dishwater utterances. By contrast, the Chicago Tribune praised the speech and believed that it will live among the annals of man. Some of the social media criticism of Donald Trump's statement about the media reaction to the Gettysburg Address cited the New York Times news story. However, if you read the story, the author merely mentions that Lincoln spoke in a very deliberate manner and doesn't praise the speech. In fact, in a previous sentence, the story describes the prayer of Reverend Stockton as touching and beautiful. Nothing like that is attached to Lincoln's speech. So it's fair to say that President Trump was at least half right. Some newspapers attacked the speech while others praised it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, now playing, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we'll take a few more phone calls, but I do also want to move on to the significance of what this might mean. There is a possibility the Supreme Court might take this case, and we've posted this article about that World War I cross. Penna Dexter has done something on the transgender suicide, so we have some other topics, but let me finish off a few more of those. And Laura, I know you waited for quite a while, so in Stockton, California, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What's your point of view?
Thank you. Well, I think we're missing the point. We're so worried about being politically correct that we're going so much the other way to make sure we don't hurt people's feelings. And in the lieu of this, that we may be running someone's life and career about something that happened in high school. And I graduated in 1982, 55 years old. And
we're losing you.
I think we lost her.
And between junior high and high school, that hasn't been slapped on the butt, touched inappropriately, a titty twister.
Okay, be careful.
Kids are kids. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But things happen, and I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not justifying it. Say that, and we do need to raise our kids to be respectful of each other. But unfortunately, we are taking it so much the other way that we're willing to try to ruin someone's career.
And that's the concern. You know, right now there seems to be so much concern about how we react, and I think we need to be careful, as we heard from one of our callers earlier, Gary, about Christine Blasey Ford. Something happened. We recognize that. We've even raised an issue earlier, mistaken identity, different memory, whatever, alcohol haze. But the bottom line is we want to treat her with respect. But a lot of people are also saying, what about Brett Kavanaugh? If indeed he is innocent, and there are a lot of people in our listening audience that believe that he is, look what has happened to him, to his wife, to his girls. The impact, they couldn't even stay in the hearings because of all the things happening there. There's a real concern there, isn't there?
There is a concern, and, it's good. I mean, Me Too, as I've said, is a mixed bag, and there's some good things about it, and that is, what our caller just sort of outlined. Some of those things that she mentioned are not okay, and you could stop it, especially if you do it immediately. That's the best way to do it, tell someone. But that doesn't mean that everything a woman says happened to her. And every accusation she makes toward a man has to be believed simply because it's a woman saying it. And that's what the left is really saying to us right now.
And think of the daughters of Judge Kavanaugh watching all this. I mean, I remember that moment in the confirmation hearing that the daughters, because of all the intensely vile things the protesters were yelling. Thankfully, most of you couldn't hear what was going on in the room. You just heard yelling and screaming. But from the friends of mine that were in the room, it was vile and it was bad. And these young ladies dressed to see their daddy going through this really important event. It's not only historic for them as a citizen of this country, but personal for them to be able to watch daddy sit up there to get an important job. They had to be escorted out so that they didn't have to hear and witness all this kind of stuff. I remember seeing his mother in tears, listening to the degrading conversation that was coming his way from the Judiciary Committee themselves. Kamala Harris insinuating that, he was in collusion somehow with these attorneys at this one firm that he never heard of. Dumb things like that. And then now to be accused of a crime he may not have committed, and then have the person who's alleging that not even have the decency to come and confront it personally, and then be used as a political pawn. I just can't help but think that those young ladies are learning from Senator Feinstein, Senator Harris, and other female senators on that committee that this is how you get ahead in life. It's not. What the lesson ought to be here, if in fact this allegation is true, is that, young ladies, we need you to come and tell us so we can help protect you. Let the legal system work itself out, but it's impossible for us to protect you if we don't know about it. It's just impossible.
The other lesson is, and really the whole rap on Kavanaugh from the left is, you hate women. Really, I mean, you won't let us. You want to stop us from having our abortions. You want to push us back into the, last century or before that because you don't want us to have opportunities because you're a mom and you've got kids. And now, you're one of those that abuses women. I mean, this is what their narrative has been. And yeah, it's a sad commentary. I think, if we are strong and this doesn't succeed, that'll be a good lesson too for young ladies of the country. If our Republicans stand strong in this and don't cave, I think that will be a lesson for the generations to come.
I hope so. And I don't want to let men off the hook here either. And I've got 4 young men that are in my family that I'm teaching how to behave appropriately towards women. And I wanted to state it categorically again. I've said it a couple of times, but reminder, this is wrong behavior for any male to engage in. I hesitate to call him a man because I don't consider him one if that is in fact what they're doing. It is wrong behavior. These teenagers that are going out and partying on the weekends or whatever, you think it's fun right now? Think about what you might want to do in the future. Do you want to have this dragged? Do you want to even have the ability to have the accusation thrown against you? Thank goodness I don't have that in my life. And I hope that in your life, whoever's listening, that's your case as well. Gary, I think it was earlier, called about his time at a school when they did this. Man, that can really put a damper on future job choices of things. And now in the presence of social media, you can almost guarantee you're going to show up on YouTube or at least Facebook or something like that. There's going to actually be evidence of this kind of thing, easily proven. Imagine if there's a cell phone of this video of this whole thing. This would be over with right now. Didn't have it back then with those bag phones. But, it's something that you need to think about right now.
I think so.
Men, conduct yourself as young men, honorably. Young ladies, likewise. But we all are in this together. We have the responsibility to conduct ourselves with honor and with a moral compass. And that type of behavior, both the drinking as well as the alleged assault, is wrong.
Yeah. And again, another life lesson that maybe we can pass on to others. I want to take one more phone call before we take a break, and then we're going to get into some other topics. But Shannon, I think you've got a very good question you want to put on the table, listening to us on KBJS. Shannon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kerby. Hey, guys. This liberal circus will turn out to be a baseless accusation against Judge Kavanaugh and really a political ploy by the Democrats. And what I wonder is, what consequences could Dr. Ford and Senator Feinstein face, and what recourse will Judge Kavanaugh have other than getting to proceed in this process?
Yeah, what are the consequences? And of course, where do you go to get your good name back? Of course, I've talked about this a bit before, that Raymond Donovan, after being acquitted, said, where do I go to get my reputation back? Which agency do I go to? And I don't think you do. That cloud hangs over you forever. But that's a good question. If indeed Dianne Feinstein has violated some of the rules of the Senate, of course, Cory Booker thought he did too, and then you have Dr. Ford bringing a false accusation. If indeed these allegations are false, is there any recourse? What's your thought?
I don't know. I have clients that worry about this a lot as well. I have one client I'm thinking of in particular who's a pastor, also a public health worker, and was accused of saying things or being anyway. It just, the whole thing was going to follow him, and the whole, he was terminated for something he allegedly said in his sermons, and that was wrong. And thankfully, we resolved that matter for him. But he said, I can't get rid of it off of Google. It's still on Google.
Right.
Judge Kavanaugh will never be able to Google his name without this popping up.
Right.
Judge Kavanaugh's daughters will never be able to Google their last name without this coming up. It will always be there. There will always be a record of that. So that reputational element of things will never be able to be wiped away. If the left is successful in preventing Judge Kavanaugh from becoming Justice Kavanaugh, his career is over. He will not be able to go back to the bench, even though he'd be permitted to resume his seat on the district court bench. He will more than likely have to resign from that. You know how these public perception things will have to go. He'll just be washed out of polite society. Will he be picked up in private practice? I hope so, but it's going to always be a cloud that will always hang over his head. It will always be there, and he will always have to confront it. Whether or not it's true, he will always have to have that thing hanging over him. If the claims are in fact false, I'm not, number one, nothing probably going to come of it all. It's a political ploy, and politicians are adept at being able to snake out of those things, and so Feinstein and others are not going to have to bear any kind of punishment for it. There may be an opportunity for someone to press a False Claims Act, basically lying to the police or the FBI, maybe, but that's probably not going to happen, regardless of whether or not they could, because it'd feel like piling on. And so the more likely outcome here is that Judge Kavanaugh is going to become Justice Kavanaugh. The political chips are going to fall where they will in November. And Dr. Ford, Blasey Ford, is that how it's pronounced?
Christine Blasey Ford, yeah.
She will probably go on to be upset that no one took her seriously. She will continue to believe that this actually did happen, and it was actually Judge Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, whoever it is at the time, and there will be no real effectual closure on this matter. And that's regrettable in so many different directions.
Well, again, we have a lot more to cover. We're going to put some things on the table, so changing topics when we come back, and we will give you that opportunity to hear about the implications at the Supreme Court right after this.
From Universal 1440 comes Unbroken, Path to Redemption, based on the best-selling book telling the rest of the true story of Olympian and World War II hero Louis Zamperini.
Tonight, there's a drowning man just looking for some type of hope for the future, but there's a lifeline. Just reach out.
Unbroken, Path to Redemption, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at unbrokenfilm.com.
You don't become an Olympian without investing all you've got. You don't become a war hero without putting it all on the line. Those who leave a mark on this world demonstrate they believe in something greater than themselves, a purpose, a cause. In a time of fake news, the need for solid information is perhaps greater than ever. Bring truth to the nation by joining the Truth Team at Point of View. Our cause needs heroes like you. Demonstrate what you believe. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. Let me, if I can, just change topics. We have Penna, Dexter, and Jeremy Dice. And one of the articles we've posted here, which I would encourage you to read in its entirety. Now, I'll warn you, I would encourage you to print it out. You better make sure you have paper in the printer because it's going to take more than 10 pages to print out. It's called The World War I Cross Under Siege. And interestingly enough, Jeremy, we earlier in this week had Joseph Locante on. We were talking about World War I. We talked about the fact that you have the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I coming up here on November 11th, 11/11/11. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And this is the Peace Cross. And so, first of all, we get a little bit of history, but also it brings us back to the Supreme Court and what's at stake, even while we've been talking about the Kavanaugh hearing. So tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, on Monday, the Supreme Court will engage what they call their long conference, which means that there's been about maybe 1,000, 2,000 petitions that have piled up all summer long since they left on the last day of June to go on recess. And they're coming back with all these petitions that are asking the court to review various cases.
Right.
This is one of them. And if you recall back and you know your history here, the Fourth Circuit has invalidated this monument and said it violates the separation of church and state, so-called. In legal terms, it violates the Establishment Clause. And so it has to effectively either be torn down or have its horizontal arms cut off, turned into an obelisk. And so today, just this morning, as a matter of fact, the Washington Post has done this incredible profile of this monument. And it is as I wrote to the reporter, I said, this is just an absolute tour de force. It's just a wonderful piece. In fact, you can go on the Washington Post story online, and you can search by name the 49 men who are on this monument, and you can read about little bios of each of these guys, and they are incredible. Let me just read a couple things from the article here if I can. One says, it says here that they were farmers from Southern Maryland, a prominent surgeon and medical school professor at Georgetown University, and a British-born Medal of Honor recipient who was president of the Marine Corps baseball team. One was only 18 and enlisted in Maryland after he was told in Washington that he was too young to join. One was a man in his 50s, already wounded in battle and having no business being on the front lines. I mean, these are the stories of these guys, 49 men from Prince George's County, Maryland, who are on the side of that monument. And then she found that the reporter found the descendants of some of these men. And it is absolutely fascinating. John Seaburn is one of the men on the monument, and she found his niece living outside of Washington, D.C., and talked to him or her, and they said, I never knew him, but I remember seeing the framed photograph of this African-American World War I soldier on the family's mantelpiece, and they always say this, the refrain among relatives was, quote, John Seaburn is at the Peace Cross. I mean, this is the memory that these people have here, that monument was, in fact, the gravestone for these men of Prince George's County, Maryland. John Seaburn is at the Peace Cross. He didn't say he's at his grave wherever it is. He's at the Peace Cross. This is his actual gravestone of things. It's just absolutely incredible. As the niece says, I'm shocked they would even think about that, knocking it down, she means. It's been there all my life. This is absolutely incredible things that now we're coming up on 100 years after not only the end of World War I, but next month will be the 100-year anniversary of when these men died. Most of these men died in 1918, October of 1918. Think about, or 1918, yeah, 1918. You're right. Get my dates right here.
You're right.
Think about that. Within a month of the war's end, they died. And so these poor mothers that lost their sons got together and said, you know what, we're not going to let our men be forgotten here, our young men. We're going to create this monument to their memory because we forget things that we do not see. And that's exactly what we have here.
Right.
And yet, unless the Supreme Court decides to hear this case and intervenes and overturns the Fourth Circuit's decision, not only will this monument be in jeopardy, but so will many monuments throughout the country. So I really urge you to read this story. It's long, but it reads like a novel. It's fantastic.
I agree. I started to read it before the show, but and I was absorbed in it. I was going to be late coming. I was reading it in my car before I came in the studio. So I'm going to finish it up, but I recommend it too. We've been talking about the Bladensburg Monument for a while as it's gone through the courts, and First Liberty has been defending the American Legion.
That's right.
And so as I've watched that's the one thing that has stuck with me, Jeremy, is that this was, these men are mostly not buried in the United States. They're somewhere else, or their body wasn't found or whatever. And so this was their memorial. This was their grave. These women started this project because they wanted to have a gravestone in a sense, but it's 40 feet high. It's very prominent. And so, this humanist society wants to take it down. It's been this fight and this battle. And now it's possible that the Supreme Court could take it. They decide next week.
They decide on Monday, and we'll know by Thursday of next week whether they're going to grant argument on the case and hear it. And we certainly hope they do. It's a really needed area of the law to have some clarity to. But you're right. At the time that this happened, none of the mothers thought that their sons' bodies would ever come back here. Now, some of them have been repatriated, and that's fantastic. But there's one man in particular that his mother actually went on a pilgrimage in the 1930s and tried to find her son's grave. But the problem was to go visit his body. I think they ultimately had a grave somewhere, but he wasn't in it. There wasn't enough of him to put in it. Mm-hmm. And so there really wasn't a grave available to her, especially here. We have one letter from a mother that was writing to her senator saying, the reason I'm so animated about this, you know why? Because I consider this my son's gravestone.
Right.
I can't go over to Europe. You can't just hop in a plane and get over there at the time. She couldn't go there, so this was her son's gravestone. By the time that monument was created, that same mother was in the last stages of cervical cancer, so she was not going to be able to even travel overseas to the American cemetery in France to be able to view what was her. We have cards from history that show us how these men were buried in the field, like where they fell, and the grand majority of them, if not all of them, were buried under a simple wooden cross. That's just how they were buried. That was the mode of the way that we marked a grave in 1919. And so that's why these women, these mothers of the fallen soldiers, chose this monument. You're right, Penna, we represent the American Legion. You know why? Because that monument was erected, it was finished by the American Legion when the mothers kind of ran out of steam and had other things to do. They picked up the gauntlet and finished this project in memory of their fallen comrades. But they chose that spot because it was American Legion property. It was, in fact, in the middle of the monument is the American Legion logo. And so it's almost impossible to pick a better client than the American Legion. And we're tickled pink to be able to represent them. And we're going to continue to do so. As Kelly Shackelford said at the recent American Legion convention, he talked about this, and we gave President Trump an award through Vice President Pence. But at the end of it, he said, I just want you guys to remember that monument, it is not coming down. It is not coming down. It is not coming down. And so I don't know whether that means I've got to, stand in front of it to make sure the bulldozer doesn't come up. I'm happy to do so, but I'll probably be standing behind a bunch of guys who served ably in the defense of our country, who themselves will stand in front of that bulldozer to make sure that it never comes down. It is not coming down.
Again, that article is entitled A World War I Cross Under Siege. Talk about what is at stake, because you mentioned just in passing, for our listeners that haven't really studied this, they might say, well, it's just one cross. Well, first of all, some suggested maybe we can take off the arms of the cross, which is just bizarre. But given the fact that it's in the Fourth Circuit Court, are there other crosses that could be affected?
Yeah. And you're not just making that line up about taking the arms off. That was actually suggested by a sitting judge of the Fourth Circuit during oral argument, that they deface a veterans monument and remove its horizontal arms and turn it into some sort of obelisk, basically desecrating a grave. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. If these mothers view this as their son's gravestone, that's what we're doing. We're desecrating the grave. But you're right. The Fourth Circuit covers Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, West Virginia, and Virginia. Well, what's in Virginia? Well, there's this great place called Arlington National Cemetery. What's in Arlington National Cemetery? Well, let me list it off for you. Well, you got the Argonne Cross, which is a memory of World War I, the battles in Argonne, donated by the French or the Belgians that sent that to us. You have the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice in recognition of the many who served not in Canada but through the United States in World War I, or vice versa. Those are both cross-shaped monuments there. The most famous one of them all that's in Arlington National Cemetery is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which is itself a World War I veterans monument. It has that famous inscription on there, "Here lies a soldier known but to God," on the side of it. I'd like to see somebody try to sandblast that past the honor guards that are standing out there. I don't think they're going to let them through, but if this decision stands, that technically would have to be the result. There are also, I love to point this out because this makes my friends on the left hopping mad. There are two men that are buried named Teddy and Bobby in the grass of Arlington, and they're buried under a Latin cross, a white, simple cross. Their last name is Kennedy. And so if in fact this decision stands, it would stand to reason then that Teddy and Bobby Kennedy, next to their brother JFK, they would have to have their grave markers removed as well. We can't let any of those things happen.
So again, that's coming up Monday. So you'll give us an update on what happens. And if nothing else, Penna, that just reminds us what's at stake when we talk about the Kavanaugh hearings, right?
Yeah, I'm glad that the Washington Post actually decided to put that article out. What, today, tomorrow?
It was today. It's today online. My suspicion will be that it'll be in the print edition tomorrow.
Okay, and you can go to pointofview.net. We've linked to it.
And it's right there. It's the last article there. We'll come back and talk about Penna's commentary, which you can hear right now if you're listening online. We'll be right back.
New research reveals that the politically correct way we're responding to teens who come out as transgender, affirming that decision and treating them with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, is not helping them. In fact, it's increasing their suffering and is dangerous. Even faced with this evidence, the left won't see it that way. The new study titled Transgender Adolescent Suicide Behavior was published in the September issue of Pediatrics, the official peer-reviewed journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. The study found that more than half of adolescents who are born female but identify as male have attempted suicide in the past year. Let me say this another way. 51% of transgender boys tried to kill themselves in the year prior to the survey. In addition, the study showed the attempted suicide rate to be 40% among adolescents who are gender nonconforming. In other words, they identify as neither exclusively male nor female. And 30% of biological boys who identify as girls said they had attempted to take their own lives in the past year. Any sane person looking at these findings would assume these teens are abnormal, troubled, and need help. In fact, the attempted suicides are a cry for help. But the help being offered by the LGBT left, and increasingly by the pediatric community, is to affirm these young people in the deception that their gender was somehow misidentified at birth. These disturbing results emerged when researchers from the University of Arizona analyzed a survey filled out by more than 120,000 young people between the ages of 11 and 19. 14% of them said they had attempted suicide at least once, a stark contrast with this alarming rate of attempts among transgender teens, with the number of teens identifying as transgender having doubled in the last decade. We've got to be brave enough as a society to admit that we're doing something very wrong. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Wait for a few more minutes. Penna Dexter and Jeremy Dice in here. And Penna, your commentary today is on the transgender teen suicide. And I might just mention 2 weeks ago you have one on transgender teens. So these two kind of come together, but a lot of it has to do with a study. It's called Transgender Adolescent Suicide Behavior, published in the Journal of Pediatrics. Now, maybe your local pediatrician's a Christian, but I know enough about the American Academy of Pediatrics to know that this was probably a little bit controversial for some of their members, and it illustrates, again, some of the issues you've been writing about over the last couple of weeks.
Well, it is controversial, and we've had Michelle Cretella on, who was a pediatrician, and now she's the, I think, chairman of the American Society of Pediatrics, and she says that this has become sort of dogma within the pediatric community now, that when you're presented with a transgender child or a child that's actually just questioning their identity, because really at that age, a lot of kids question. They think, well, you know, maybe I'm a boy, maybe I'm a girl, I want to play with dolls, whatever. And now the pediatricians are supposed to affirm that. That's their kind of new way of operating. And, you know, you start with just the affirmation, then you go ahead with puberty blocking hormones, and then there's the surgeries. And so these two studies have come out. One I talked about a couple of weeks ago was the social contagion, where girls in peer groups are coming out saying that, I'm the opposite gender. I'm not comfortable with being a girl, so I'm a boy now. And they're doing it in groups. In some groups, parents are reporting that 50 or more % of the girls in the group are doing this. And so they're calling it a social contagion. A Brown University professor wrote about it, and it was out there. It was peer reviewed. And then there was so much pushback from the transgender and LGBT community. Brown took it down. Now, another study comes out, new research revealing that transgenders, teens are committing suicide at very, very high rates. As a matter of fact, this was a huge study of 120,000 students, ages 11 to 19. And of those, out of that, 50% of kids who are transgender boys,
yes.
in other words, they weren't comfortable with being girls, have attempted suicide in the past year. And that is huge. The numbers are also high for transgender girls and also very high for students or young people who don't know what gender they are. They're confused. And, this isn't funny anymore because it's being not treated as, oh, there's something wrong with you or
yes.
let's help you, you're troubled. They're being treated now with drugs to affirm it, hormones to affirm it, and eventually surgeries to affirm it. So life-changing actions are being taken on the basis of this. I think a lot of people that see this study that talks about transgender teen suicide will say, well, we need to do more to affirm it. That's the exact wrong answer. We've been doing things to affirm it, and we're seeing these suicide rates. So the results are absolutely disturbing. I think that the pediatric community that is coming out in support of affirming these transgender tendencies or thoughts in young people is doing something criminal, really. And that's what Dr. Catella calls it. She says it's child abuse.
And Dr. Paul McHugh, we've
Yes.
talked about him before, has talked about this. There's a guy that said, probably the best thing we can do is just do the hormonal therapies and the surgeries and all that. And eventually an individual at Johns Hopkins University said, this is just not working. It's not making a difference. And for individuals, back to your other point that you mentioned just real quickly about suicide, the argument is, well, that's because we're not affirming enough of transgenders. Well, you can go to other countries which do affirm this, some of the Nordic countries, and the suicide rate is there as well. So this argument that if we just affirm them a little bit more, then they won't be suicidal, hasn't worked in other countries which give even more affirmation to transgender ideas than what we have in the United States. And maybe it's coming back to some common sense. But this article, which I'm glad you've posted, is just another reason why we need to just pay attention to some of that. Because, as I said before, you may be taking your kids or your grandkids to the pediatrician, and then all of a sudden, maybe they've got some gender dysphoria. They're trying to think it through. You're going to be surprised that your physician that you love, that your family has gone to for years, is saying, well, I really do think maybe what we need to do is just head down this road of various kinds of drug treatments and sex hormones and puberty blockers and maybe even surgery. And you're going, where did that come from? And that's why it's important to pay attention to some of these studies, which show that, again, 1 out of every 2 transgender adolescents who are born female but identify as male attempted suicide in the last year. That's just horrific.
It is. And, when a parent comes to a doctor with that kind of news, like my little boy is, talking about maybe he's a girl. And, of course, people are talking about that now in the culture more. So you're going to we are getting more and more of that. You want to hear, okay, well, what kind of help can I get for this? How can I get my child on the right track?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And instead, even if a pediatrician is pretty maybe sort of religious or traditional in their thinking, they're now getting pressure from their associations, their pediatric groups, to affirm this. And as a matter of fact, Michelle Cretella, when she was practicing and she was trying to get these kids help and counseling, she was getting persecuted for it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's going. And that's why we as believers need to stand up against that.
So again, that article is on the website. It's Penna's commentary. And let me just mention again, as we always do, that you can click on that and it's under Read Now and you can read that. But also there's a place on the left-hand side where you can sign up. And if you sign up, that means you get my commentary Monday through Friday in your inbox. You get Penna's on Saturday. And so let me just encourage you to get that and maybe even think about passing it on to your family pediatrician in that regard. Just about out of time. Jeremy, I want to come back to you because we've got a very important prayer target for Monday and also some great material there at First Liberty. So talk about some of the resources available for our listeners here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Not only do you have Monday being the time that the court will review and consider whether they're going to take the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Monument Memorial, but very soon thereafter. In fact, it was supposed to be the same day, but they've delayed it now. Coach Joe Kennedy's case is at the Supreme Court right now. And so that will be probably a week or two after that the court will review that. My suspicion is they're waiting for Judge Kavanaugh to become Justice Kavanaugh. We'll see where that goes, but both of those, we would value your prayers to see the court take both of those cases. And then if they do take both those cases, then pray for our staff because it's going to get busy.
Sure.
But that's a great thing for us to be busy on. But there's all kinds of good resources for you at firstliberty.org. One thing you could do just right now even, and people underestimate how important these things are, but go to First Liberty's Facebook profile, follow us on social media. There's a great video that the Daily Signal has produced and released last night on Coach Kennedy, as a matter of fact. It's gone over 1.5 million views as of from last night about 8 o'clock till now. So it clearly has struck a nerve. And it's something that I tell you, people get that kind of message out. It goes all over the place. It's important. Look, justices are consumers of media as well as you and I are. They may not be on Facebook that we know of, but my guess is their clerks probably are. They pay attention to these things. They see these articles. They watch these videos like you and I do. And so it's good for us to share these things around, make sure more people know about it. And maybe there's a coach down the street from you that is going through the same thing Coach Kennedy has and would be encouraged by this information. So simple acts like that, the click of a button, literally, of sharing and liking is a big deal for us at firstliberty.org.
As you go to firstliberty.org, scroll all the way down, you'll get to a section called First Liberty Briefing, and you can listen to any one of the commentaries by Jeremy, and we, of course, play that every day as well. And, of course, today we got a chance to hear Penna Dexter, but again, that's available to you as well. We have a lot to cover next week, not to mention what's happening in the Senate Judiciary Committee, so have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Go mobile with Point of View and take transformation with you on the go. Search in Google Play or the Apple Store for Point of View Radio, the Point of View Radio mobile app. Download it free today.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.